Michael, it is great to have you on today to the NTM Growth Marketing Podcast. I'm excited for our dialogue.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Well, before we hit record, something that I was not aware of is you actually have a very in-depth marketing background, even though you're currently a CEO. I'd love to hear a little bit about your fascination with marketing and why was this such a big part of your career before your current role as CEO?
I never intended to go into marketing. My initial foray into the computer and the software industry was way back in the 80s. That's why all the gray hair. And I was a sales engineer and working for a company called Novell. At the time was the fifth largest software company in the world. And the way I got into marketing was being dissatisfied with the company's marketing. And so I would go evaluate competitors and do research on them, pull teams together. I created a 35-page document on how to sell against this particular competitor. And next thing you know, just because of my field research and competitive research and positioning and just figuring stuff out on my own, the senior VP of marketing for the company at the time would have me present at trade shows and against our competitors and not have the people in marketing do that. And eventually, it didn't actually take very long after I started to speak to analysts and speak publicly and create documents. They brought me out and said, "Hey, we'd like you to run product marketing for our billion-dollar product." And I'm like, "Whoa, I don't know anything about marketing." He said, "Well, let me tell you what marketing is about." And he picked up my document that I created. He says, "It's about this. It's about understanding your competitors. It's about understanding how to position your product. It's about understanding how to message it. And it's about sharing that information with everybody else in the company so that they can do the same." And he says, "And that's what you do right now. It's not part of your job, but that's what you do. And that's what we need." And so it was interesting. I said, "Okay, you guys are going to regret this, but this is what I'm going to do." And I think I had an advantage because I didn't really understand the right way to do things. So my very first day on the job, the PR firm came in and said, we released a press release today on this very obscure technology. And they said, and you need to do 8 interviews with publications today. And I said, "Well, what do you want quoted?" And they rolled their eyes and they said, "Well, you can't control that." And I'm like, "Who are we talking to?" And they said, "Well, you're talking to reporters." I said, "Reporters are people, and people can be directed." And so, and they rolled their eyes again. So I wrote a quote up on a whiteboard and I said, "I think I'd like this quoted today." And so through the conversations, 8 different conversations, that was quoted 4 times in the day. And so we started to have a different approach to PR because I didn't know what the limitations were. I didn't know what you're supposed to do. And so I started to, kind of at that point, direct PR. Through that company, I ended up leaving and going to a CRM company called SalesLogix that was a real fast-growing CRM company. And I went from that position to chief marketing officer for SalesLogix. And so marketing is evidently something that was born into me rather than taught to me. And I'm just a huge fan of the convergence of product, marketing, and PR. And I'm a freak for data. I love to be able to track outcomes, adjust as you go. And my favorite thing is, at that convergence of product, being able to say, I want, just kind of like I did on my first day in a marketing job, say, I want people to say this in a year. What do they need to believe today, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now, to say that without being prompted about us. And so the building and the stacking of messaging over time, not really determining the outcome based on a date, but based on once they're saying this, now we shift to this, now we shift to this. So that message transition and building those building blocks so that the end message isn't something that you're harping all the time, but it's essentially an equation. It's the conclusion of all the things that you've built through time, and that involves partnerships, it involves PR, it involves product releases, all of those different pieces working together. So I guess that's why I'm more of a CMO than an individual marketer, because I see the intersection of all those pieces working together. And that's what I love about marketing.
Can you elaborate a little bit more then on what makes a great CMO?
I think I don't know if I ever was a great CMO, so I'm not sure if I can actually say that, but understanding the strategy of the business. So what I did at that company was run strategy and marketing, right? So it's the ability to draw connections. I think it's the most important thing for a CMO is to understand the big picture, but to also understand the daily interactions and the daily deliverables that need to happen to be able to add up to that big picture over time. Because the CMO is interacting with the CFO and the CEO
Right.
all the time, and the chief sales officer, right? So you're serving the chief sales officer, you're helping meet the vision of the CEO, and you're accountable to the CFO.
Right.
And so how do you take all of that strategic stuff and deliver direction down to people who are building a product marketing resources for sales, right? Depending on the size of the company, you're closer. Like if you're a mid-sized company, the CMO is still pretty close to the people building daily deliverables and messaging on the website. And if you're a CMO for a very large company, you're more extracted from that. But at a mid-sized company or a small company, the CMO has to understand all those pieces.
One more question on that. What advice would you have to a CMO to not lose touch of the customer and what they truly are looking for in your product? Whether that's like focus groups, just being on the street, active in Slack, the social channels. What are some ways they can stay connected to that customer?
Big companies do a lot of focus groups. I've done tons and tons of focus groups. I'm not an enormous fan of focus groups because very often they tend to end up being groupthink led by the strongest individual in that room. What I love to do was, my first day on the job at Sales Logics, I said, bring me the software and I'm going to install it. And they're like, no, you're going to need a lot of help. I'm like, that's what I want to figure out. Right. And so I learned the software. I understood it. I have to know the product, right? So you need to spend time in the product. And then you need to, if you're generating leads, you need to understand sales. So you need to sit in on sales conversations. And you're never too high in an organization to learn from a salesperson. That is just a fact that most marketers don't, not most marketers, a lot of marketers just don't seem to understand. They need to know the daily struggles of positioning. You sit in one sales call and you understand what people are saying, how they're saying it, and how clients are responding to it. A lot of the problems of your marketing team. And, just in, one 30-minute call, right. You're like, oh my gosh, they're saying what out there? Why are they saying that? They should never say that. What are you doing? What tools are we providing them that is leading them to saying this or not providing them? That's what a salesperson really needs to figure out. I would say go beyond that to meet with the sales engineers and the product managers, right? So you've got to be able to engage at that level as well. And so the marketing person just really needs to be able to take in a lot of information and then figure out where the disconnects are, because their job is to make sure everybody's singing from the same hymn book,
Love that insight. So let's fast forward a little bit. You're now a CEO. Can you tell us a little bit about your current organization and how you made that jump from CMO to CEO?
Well, it was my last company. I was running strategy for that company. We sold it to a company called Sage in the beginning of 2001, which is a great time to sell a company. The second 2001 was not a great time to sell a company. So I will take credit for that strategy. I felt the clouds circling and tried to direct the CEO to sell the company at a peak of the market. After that, I ended up doing consulting for CEOs that I thought I was doing consulting. They would bring me in to say, all right, what do I need to do with my product and my messaging and my marketing? Because they had hit maybe a threshold at that 10 million, $25 million level when more than anything, the CEO's job needs to change. The founder needs to change or fire themselves. They probably need to fire themselves from a couple of jobs. What I found is that many of them needed to fire themselves from their entire job. And so I ended up switching more to coaching. I got certified as a International Coaching Federation coach. I switched from consulting to coaching, and then I moved to Russia for 7 years.
Wow.
Not the answer you thought you were going to get.
Oh, did not see that one coming.
Yeah, so I moved to St. Petersburg, Russia, and I was coaching adult children of alcoholics to be successful in business. Not all of them were, but there's a lot of that over there. So I was helping people grow in their skills and leadership. While I was there, I got introduced to some behavioral science that had been used pretty much just in the clinical world, but I saw an application in the business world and in workforce programs and educational programs. And so Russia changed the visa laws so that I could only be there 90 days every 6 months, which isn't conducive to running a business very easily. So I moved back to the States, and I set up a business here. And initially that business was focused on helping people develop in these skills, and it was tools for coaches. And then in 2018, we pivoted our company to build a platform that connected people. Mostly, we're a social impact software company based in Denver, but it connected people mostly in disadvantaged populations to services, to career tools, to education, and to the people that can help them along their career journey. It's called My Journey. And a year and a half ago, we acquired a product that is a case management product for workforce and adult education and work-based learning, like apprenticeships and internships. And so now we have this very robust system that is statewide in Colorado, DC, 9 adult education consortia across California, Florida, Virginia, and Baltimore City Public Schools. So in a couple of years, we've grown pretty quick. Once we figured out, product market fit and got the right pieces in our product. So yeah, we're in Denver. I got people kind of all over now, especially with the pandemic, and we're expanding to other states.
Can you talk a little bit about how marketing has fueled the growth of the organization?
It's an interesting thing. Our initial product, our initial My Journey product that we launched in 2019, um, really difficult to figure out how to do marketing with that, because the procurements are very large. They're typically in multi-million dollars procurements. The smallest is probably around a couple 100,000. And those usually require RFPs, and you have to go through this process that you're not a lot in control of. So what we had to learn as we were entering a new market was, where are the watering holes for the people who make these decisions? And so we, instead of initially spending a lot of money marketing our product, I decided that we needed to spend money getting to know the people that were in the industry, and getting to know what our competitors were saying, and getting to know what their problems were, because we were building the plane while it was flying, right? So we launched our version 1.0 of our product, across 2 states in Virginia and Colorado simultaneously on the same day, right? I mean, which is ill-advised. It worked, but it was a lot of PTSD with our devs. I don't think any of them are still here. Uh, but so what we did is we really focused on events, and we focused on developing trust relationships initially. So
So no,
marketing, what's
just to
that?
interject real quick. So it was not digital oriented marketing activities. It was more non-digital stuff, which was your early
There
onset.
was well, what we did was we led with PR to build trust, right? So there's this idea of the stages that we had to go through, right? So the first stage was when you are a brand new player in a well-established market, what do, right? Well, you play with we're new and innovative, and you lead with that. And so, but that only works for a while, because you're going to get those early adopters who want something new and innovative. And in government and education and workforce, that's not the majority of the people, right? So you have to grab those early adopters. If you think of the crossing the chasm kind of thing, right? You have to get those early adopters, and so you have to hammer the new and innovative. So you know you have to have a digital component that is tied to PR that you're doing. You have to extend it. So I led with PR. We led with conferences, but you're building trust. And so what we did is we worked really, really hard to present at conferences. So the year that COVID happened, I was scheduled to speak at 23 different conferences that year.
Wow.
And so what you do is you use digital to drive traffic to your talks, and to basically, establish that you're a thought leader, right? And
Right.
so whether someone comes to or not, you use digital to be able to celebrate that and share it. Then you use digital to connect with the people that physically are there, but you also have to have a physical presence, at a booth. And so, what we tried to do is we tried to make sure that all of that messaging and all of that branding was consistent, from the website, from the physical messages in the booth and design, to what we were talking about, who we partnered with in those events. And so we kind of, I felt like we had done a really good job of hacking getting approval, getting selected to present, because we did panels, and we aligned our panels with the messages. So I would primarily be the moderator for a panel, and I would have clients and experts in the field that we knew, and we talk about very interesting things. But me being the moderator allowed me to control the communication of that panel. And so what ended up happening is that we would use digital to drive people to that event and sponsorships. Then we would use social media in the event, right? And then we would use SEO related to all of that, to make sure that when people start looking at these types of things, that they get connected to, hey, there's a lot of activity happening in this field, and particularly this client. One of the big things we did is, which was helpful for us, is doing analysis of our competitor sites. So we would do a PR share of voice with particular folks. We track that every month. And then we did SEO analysis on all of our competitor sites. And that allowed us to basically say, learn, where are the gaps in their communication? Like, most of the folks in our industry are horrible at PR. They just don't do it. But they've done a pretty good job in SEO, some of them. And so we learn from their words, right? From their tags and all of that, so that we do the right thing. So at least we're equal to them in certain areas. But then we identified a big gap in, we're starting a campaign and right after Labor Day, that's just a series of releases and tying those two events, and that we're going to try to drive a lot of traffic to specific landing pages that are targeted to those specific messages that then tie into our lead system into Salesforce. So all that stuff has to work together, but you just got to figure out, most of the folks in procurement don't go Google, hey, where do I find a case management system for our Department of Labor? Right? That's not how that happens. They're like, who are the big players? And let's release a request for information, make sure that they participate so that we can discover what is available. So when we write our RFP, we're going to be able to make sure that we include the right things to get the right vendors there. That might be a 2-year process. It's painful as hell for us.
So you don't need to disclose any info you don't want to around the major win you just had a few days ago. Talk to us a little bit about, if you reverse engineered how that big contract came through, what advice would you have in that process you went through?
Well, that was a big deal with the largest agency in the state of Colorado. We had already had one relationship there. There was a lot of competitive analysis, right? So we were able to identify who all the players were that responded. They told us that, and we did a lot of really rapid competitive analysis for the things that we didn't know before we responded to that RFP. I would say that one of the biggest things that was a contributor to us being considered was the associations that we happen to have within the organization. We're sponsors of different types of programs, educational and workforce programs. They see our name a lot. They see that their translation is that we care, right? And that we understand. Those two things, I think, are the biggest factors. Where our product might have been short is the trust that we've been able to build because of those types of things. They see us in the news all the time. They see us, winning awards. They see that other people trust us, and organizations like theirs. So a lot of quotes, a lot of impact reports, a lot of those types of things. That bridged the gap of maybe a feature that might be missing compared to someone else. What I never, ever want to rely on is feature lists and price. And we don't want to be the lowest price. You're leaving money on the table. You don't want to be the highest price. Where you get that in competitive research. So I do a lot of competitive research.
And I love that, of not wanting the discussion to get into features and price points. And I think you made a really great point too, of you don't want to be the lowest in the market and then simultaneously the highest. So what advice do you have on finding that sweet spot of a price point? And maybe it's just as simple as do competitor research and see what everyone else is doing.
So I got a long history of competitor research. I did it myself. And, I would go, when I started doing this, before that paper that I wrote, I told you about, I went to clients that were joint clients, and I would give them free stuff. And I would say, hey, I'm going to give you like 10 hours of consulting if you teach me everything about my competitor. Right. And the new product, because they were a beta, and they must have had an NDA, but I wasn't aware of it. But they were a beta of my competitor's product. Actually, it was Microsoft, and they taught me everything. This particular company, who will not be named, taught me everything about my competitor's soon to be released product. And so there's like the brute force way of doing this, which is completely relational. And then there's the basic digital research or signing up for demos. There's also the gathering actual data. In government, it's easier because I can do a Freedom of Information Act, a FOIA request, and I can get their proposals and I can get their contracts and I can get the awards, right? What a lot of companies don't do is redact a lot of those things. So we send two versions in. We send a redacted version in that takes out pricing and, except for summary pricing, and it takes out all of our, critical things. You'd be shocked how many companies don't do that. And it's best to have a third party do the FOIA requests, because then you don't piss off the potential future client because you're making them jump through a bunch of hoops. So there are third-party companies that actually do this, and then they'll just request all the contracts, bunches of states. They have to respond. And if you work in government, if you work in education, if you work in workforce, that's an easy way to do that. So we gather that data, we do our research, and then we can start looking at the structure and how people price, and then you adjust accordingly. And the thing is that since I do product and marketing, my objective is to have 75% of the features at least of your competitors, and then to have uniqueness that is hard for your competitors to create, that the client will perceive as more valuable than that 25% that you don't have. And so what happens is they're like, yeah, they check enough of the boxes, but the discussion isn't about the boxes that you check. You got to get to that waterline of functionality to then say, yes, but we've got this and nobody else has it. And let me tell you about how valuable that is. Let me tell you the impact of that. So now you're selling from a strength. I want to spend 80% of my time selling from a strength. I don't want to spend 80% of my time saying, yeah, we do that too. Right. And that's just not a way. It's like, it doesn't work in dating. It doesn't work in anything else. Yeah, I'm just as good as that guy, right? Not going to work, right? And it certainly doesn't work in sales.
I just heard a quote a few days ago, and it was saying it's better to be unique than better, which sounds similar to what you're saying right now, that really hone in on those differentiating factors of your product.
Yes, I agree with that completely. And especially when you're a smaller company battling the 800-pound gorilla in your market, the thing that I always try to do is work with the marketing and the product team and sales and figure out how can we structure our contract and our pricing and the way we package it so that for our competitor to be an apples to apples comparison to us, they'd have to change their entire business model. Like, can we approach this from a business model perspective to say, oh, that stuff that they charge a whole bunch of, that's free on our thing. And we have a different, in our contracts, we're not going to, like one of our big competitors, they're the 800-pound gorilla. When your data gets into their system, they charge you access for it. And I just morally don't agree with that. I think it's your data is your data. It's in our system. We should give you free access to it. So this is one of the ways that we compete is we say, you'll never be charged for access for your data. And we're going to give you all these different types of reporting tools. And then we say, but this other thing that they don't do, we're going to charge you, a premium for that.
Mhm.
And so they can look at it. It would require our clients to basically go back and renegotiate contracts and completely change the way they do business. And that allows a smaller company with a unique offering to compete with bigger companies, because you've got a limited amount of time. I always think that if you've got, there is no, there's a there's a Bible verse that says there is nothing new under the sun, and there's science, that says there is nothing new. It's just all things are just reconstituted, right? They're just in different structures, right? And so that's one of the basic laws of science, is there is actually nothing new. It is just all, reconstituted things. So what if you come out with something new and different, your window to be able to convince people that that's new and different is probably a couple years at best, especially when you're competing against somebody big. So you got to be able to make hay really quick with that. And so what you want to do is you want to try to combine your contract terms, your positioning, your product features, and your messaging and your pricing in such a way that you can extend that window as long as you can of your differentiator. So one differentiator they can build. You tie that to your contracting and your pricing and everything else. It might take them going, oh, they'll never be successful. They'll never be successful. How many big companies have we seen that ignored a competitor that had a different approach and then went, oh, crap, we should have taken them seriously. And it was too late at that point. And that's what I want to do, is try to tie as many of those things together as possible. So you're different enough to where it's intriguing to the client, but it's confusing enough to the long in the tooth competitor, to where they're like, they'll never succeed, or we would have thought of it.
It sounds like you enjoy being more of the David instead of the Goliath. It sounds like you like taking on the Goliath with your marketing.
Very much so. Yeah, I prefer that. And it's a lot more fun, and you can move quicker. I mean, I don't know if you've ever worked in a really large corporation, but it's difficult to like move the ship, right? When I was put in charge of this marketing for this $1 billion product, 6 months later, I went to the executive staff and I said, this isn't the future of the company. Now, that was 90% of our revenue. And I said, the future of our company is this free thing that is inside of here that we need to put on our competitors' platforms. And let me tell you the business case of why that's important. In one day, 6 months after I got my dream job, I was the savior for half of the company and Satan for the other half, right? And I just created so much conflict. Fortunately, Eric Schmidt came from Sun and did a stint as our CEO before he went to run Google. And we connected, and I was able to contribute to the writing of his initial speeches on the future of the internet. And so he and his publicist, a guy named Raymond Nasser, and I, wrote a lot of his speeches. And then my team of folks on in my marketing group built all the demos for him. So we kind of had this ability to, Eric now goes up and says, the future is this, and it just happened to be my product or my strategy. And so all of a sudden my phone started to ring, or I started to get emails from everyone. Hey, can you come to our weekly team meeting? And evidently that thing that you're doing is important to the company. And so, but you had to be really strategic, and you had to fight in big companies to get things to move. I'm a small company, right? Interns will come in from, over the summer, and I'll tell them, the first thing I'll tell them is, you're not going to believe me probably until it's too late. But if you have a good idea and you can back it up, we will listen to it and we will redirect things. And they're like, yeah, okay, sure. And then one might get bold enough a month later to actually share something, and we run with it. And then they're like, oh man, they were serious, right? Because they're taught before you go into an internship is, you got to stay in your place, you got to do this and that. That's just not how smaller companies work. At least companies that want to grow quickly. I mean, I want your ideas. I don't really give a damn where they come from. I want to hear good ideas. Now, what I also tell them is that be prepared. If I think it might have promise, I will beat the crap out of it, and you will want to take that personally, but you can't. You need to be prepared to argue with me. It's not a personal thing. If I think it has promise, I will try to test it as much as I can. And if it survives that, we run with it or modify it in some way. But if I don't argue with you about your thing, I was not impressed.
So let's end today with one last question. What advice do you have for marketers as we're thinking towards the tail end of this year to pay attention to?
There's a lot that's very, very market specific. I would say I don't even think it's the tail end of this year. I think I'm going to talk about your own career as a marketer, be the expert. If someone tells you this is what you need to know to do your job, do not stop there. And if they say, read these things and you'll understand, question all of them. Do your own work. Meet with the salespeople, meet with the product people, have the meetings that your boss is probably going to ask, why are you doing that? Do the extra research. And then what will happen is that people will start coming to you. And I'd say it's going to make you better at whatever part of marketing you're doing, but it's also going to make you better as a person on that team, as someone who can be trusted and someone who understands. And that increases your influence and that increases your career path.
Love it, Michael. Thank you so much for your time today.
It's my pleasure.